Good evening. I'm super glad to be back here since last year I presented something about autonomous vehicle. I transitioned team. Now I work for the office of the CTO within Uber. So I would like to talk to you today in a little bit more formatted function around the future of mobility. So first, I want to introduce you about Uber as a platform. What does that mean for the near future? And then we'll go into the three areas that you'll hear from subsequent talkers within this talk about clean energy, last mile mobility, and also the shared mobility side that Uber has been really good at. And what does that mean for the new world in about 5 to 10 years down the road? So to briefly introduce myself, I started my career out as a sensor engineer from Intel, and then worked on the network communication at AT&T and built the drone system for the US government under Northrop, and then worked on the autonomous vehicle system and the actual drone delivery system at Google X, and most recently I worked at Uber ATG, which was the self-driving car initiative within Uber. My personal mission is everything that nature has solved, technology should be able to actually replicate it. And the knowledge behind that mission actually came from Brazil. So in the early 2000s, I was super unhappy about my career. So I printed out a list of 10 happiest countries in the world, and Brazil happened to be one of them. And as I was traveling in the deep Amazon, I met a little hummingbird that was flying through. And if you know or have seen a hummingbird near Foz do Iguaçu, it has a sensor that's about this small, that's called its eyes, and a brain that's also this small, that is complicated to a GPU or a CPU in modern technology. So if a hummingbird that's this small is able to navigate through the world just fine, then there should be a technology replacement that's able to replicate what the hummingbirds are already able to do. And that's the mission I serve and try to change the transportation mobility industry. So in 2017, I shared about what autonomous vehicle is and what timeline and future composes within the autonomous system. Today, as you know, you heard from Hyperloop, and you'll be hearing from a lot more people in this shared mobility electric vehicle and safe vehicles. We would like to discuss more about Uber as a platform and what does that mean to the future of mobility. So how many of you guys used Uber before coming here, or how many of you guys even taken Uber to come to this event? So the Uber really transformed overall the space around new technologies and how we travel already. But this is just a beginning for a company like Uber that's looking into a much more rigorous technical innovation within the transportation industry. So cars for Uber is like books for Amazon. So before Amazon was able to scale to do everything that you are able to purchase through a simple platform, they started with this notion of books before they were able to go into different avenues that you could actually purchase into. And that's what vehicles are for us, but with safe and sound and technology innovation combined together. So here's 3 examples of what our city could look like. If you look at the first picture, the empty space, that is considered a space around if we're able to eliminate about 50% of the people that has car ownership and 25% using a shared vehicle system. The middle is what we experience today on a day-to-day basis. And because of that, the far right is how much waste we endure from having car ownership altogether. So in terms of average car occupancy, that means how many people are actually in a vehicle at every given time. San Francisco usually has about 1.04 people in a single vehicle. That means you're wasting almost 4 slots that you could actually share with somebody else. And even Uber today is only able to handle 1.2 person in a single vehicle, even if it's in a shared mobility system. The chart on the right shows the total GDP per capita per how many car ownership is per people. And you could see Brazil on that curve is already close to the maximum threshold that's possible, and US is far surpassing the ownership level that's needed. But what's amazing is the total shared travel within the US, personal cars is about 84% of the travel method, and Uber and shared mobility is only less than 1%. And out of that percent, most people use it for round trip or one way, and open jaw, airport, and end-to-end travel has been actually limiting, and those are the areas that we believe that needs to be improved overall together. So this is one of the new concept of Uber as a platform that how we're going to be changing in the future. So Uber recently acquired the jump bike system, and the jump bikes that's deployed in the city currently gets utilized about 9 times out of the day. So without ownership, you're eliminating about 8 bikes that people could purchase and replace that with an actual shared mobility solution. And other scooters and other form of these platform is only about 0.84 to about 2 of them. So that means what Uber wants to do in the future is from point A to your end game, back to home, we want you to actually use the Uber platform. So the demo that you're seeing that's currently progressing is an example of that, where you push a button, and as you push a button, then you're able to get on the jump bike, then transfer over to Uber or whatever transportation that's necessary, maybe even Hyperloop in the future, and get you to the end destination in a very cost-effective way. This is something that will actually resolve the over-congestion in the cities and the areas with a very minimal cost that we currently endure altogether. So the 3 themes the company is very focused on is 1, shared mobility that you already know of, and a lot of other folks will discuss to you about the electric vehicle space, and automation, of course, that I explained in 2017. So Uber currently operates on 600+ cities across the world, and the movement is towards Uber as a platform so people could be able to enjoy transportation in a much more seamless way compared to what we currently use. So let's talk about future of mobility and what does that mean. So last year, I discussed something about the self-driving tech and how that progression is. In the past year, it's just phenomenal to myself, who's been in this industry for about 15 years, that the industry has grown at this fast of pace, which is 250% growth in terms of the actual money that was going into the autonomous industry. And it has advanced further, but there are tech that needs to be resolved further, and I know many other people in the space is trying to solve that problem. Today, the 3 major themes that I mentioned earlier about clean mobility, last mile mobility, and shared mobility is something that I want you to really think about, because the subsequent talks will be around this space, as well as how we think about the city should really look like. So what is clean mobility? In terms of the number of vehicles that we consume on a yearly basis, that's the number. 70 million new vehicles are being produced. And contrary, more than 30,000 people in the world currently die because of the pollution that was induced by these vehicles. And what's much more surprising is 68% of the world population really don't need access to their own ownership of a vehicle. But out of the 68%, 72% of those people currently own vehicle, which is kind of an oxymoron. And the personal vehicle causes about 13% of the overall green gas emission across the world today. That's absolutely something that we as humanity and society should be thinking about and talking about. So how can we actually resolve this? There are many incentives that is currently being provided for people who are owning electric vehicles, but the charge infrastructure is something that a lot of companies within the US and Europe is currently working on. Also, every OEM is developing some kind of an electric battery vehicle, such as Toyota, GM, Volkswagen. Challengers like Tesla, NIO, Faraday Futures are trying to disrupt this market, but there's also other opportunities within the clean automobile industry in bikes, scooters, and trucks that hasn't been touched yet. The cost of these electric vehicles versus a traditional gasoline vehicle has about a 25% premium. That means the electric vehicles are about 25% more expensive because people choose to purchase the gasoline vehicles. And if we change 10% of our current fleet, we are able to save the trees that we consume that's equivalent to the state of Sao Paulo. What is last mile mobility on the second theme? Out of those people who live that has public transportation and within the city, 68% of the mobility request is within 2 kilometers. That means it's not that far that you actually go through it, but most people still try to use their automobile vehicle to move these short distances, which is super inefficient. 87% of the mobility that's being conducted are by combustion vehicles, cars, bus, and trains. And most of these costs, if you use a replacement mobility system, could be less than $2 a day for everyone, including insurance cost. And that's why compact mobility like scooters and bikes are a much more lucrative area to go into in terms of urban spaces. And you can reduce 75% of those space if you actually tend to choose to use that. And I know it's difficult as a behavior perspective, but it is something that we should think about. How we are doing this is mainly a huge blocker on the infrastructure side, having accessible bike lanes or scooters. And if you look at the photo on the right, you're not able to see it very clearly, but that was a simulation that was run from here to the nearest Starbucks that's down the street, which is about 1.3 kilometers away. And we simulated during a normal traffic hour, which is actually faster to get there in Sao Paulo. And it took 13 minutes by a vehicle from here to actually go to Starbucks, that's 1.3 kilometers away, and took a bike 11 minutes to actually get there. So if you think about it, it's actually faster to use these alternative mobility that's live within the urban space. And if you replace those by 20% of the last mile transport with these shared mobility space, you're able to reduce the overall congestion by 40% in the state of Sao Paulo. And not only that, it's much more cost effective as a society, where you'll only need to pay 15% of your car ownership to use this for the next 10 years. And what's even worse is urban delivery that's currently done by DHL, FedEx, and these drop institution uses the same trucking system to do small, lightweight delivery. Shared mobility. Shared mobility is something that you already know. It's a platform like Uber, 99, and so many other mobile apps that gets you connected from point A to point B. And these vehicles, if you think about it, the average of the usage of vehicles that you currently own are about 2%. Most of the time, you spend it in parking or in traffic. The actual drive time out of the whole year is not that much. The actual shared mobility that we currently as an Uber have about 10+ million rides per day, utilize these vehicles that you own that's 2% to about 15%, which is a huge improvement in the overall metrics. But still, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The general infrastructure is already built around, but If you think about how we spend our tax money, we spend a lot of our tax money on this infrastructure. So think very carefully about this. The more money we put into infrastructure, that means we get wider roads, more accessibility, more parking space, because that's what people believe is the solution to traffic congestions initially. But what that actually does is it incentivizes people to own more vehicles. And then what happens over time is you end up actually getting the same congestion that you had before because you incentivize bad behavior to actually get on the road with your personal vehicles more, because maybe the overall congestion got dropped by 30% by creating a new road, larger parking space, which is easier to actually drive, and it separates the building-to-building space much further out as well. In that infrastructure alone, the collaborative rate, the waste is about $5.2 trillion a year. That is more than the US's overall budget for their financial spending and everything combined together. And we could actually eliminate this by just reducing 30% of our behavior of how we do mobility in an urban transportation area. So what does this mean? It means the largest commodity in urban industry is actually space. One train is equivalent to 15 buses, which is equivalent to 300 cars. So I know it's not convenient sometimes, but the more you use these public transportation, you're able to eliminate more congestion and societal costs that we are currently inducing to actually spend on something that's better, like education or healthcare. Vehicle operating closer to capacity waste. If you have 2 people in a vehicle at all times, you're reducing 20% of the total waste that your society consumes. 3 people, 50%. 4 people, 80%. That means the overall space of Sao Paulo could be reduced by about 20% if all vehicles are almost full of capacity at all time. And your commute will also drop by more than 70% from wherever you go from point A to point B. And this is what the urban planners constantly state to folks like us, that big roads, more vehicle, less congestion initially, but more congestion over time. And actually, the more you spend on infrastructure, the public transportation companies and agencies get less funding as well. So there was a very interesting case study that we conducted in London, and we switched all of the parking lots that was mandated by the actual government to free market-based parking. And actually it eliminated most of the actual law to actually have required parking space for every store. And the actual behavior what it induced was less people were using vehicles, and the city was getting more compact, and the real estate costs, which was embedding those actual parking costs, slowly degraded over time in the past 10 years. It's something that we could benchmark as a society together, what the Londoners has already consumed. And autonomy. A lot of people always question about, where is autonomy going? What's the next thing? And we get a lot of questions around this. And I think a lot of people in the autonomy industry is also very curious about what is going to be actually breaking through. But these are some of the space that autonomy folks are currently focusing on, such as autonomous electric charging, jump bike charging. Vehicle is one thing that everybody's very interested in. Robots that actually deliver goods to you, that's also autonomy. And flying cars or mobility within the autopilot system that Embraer, Boeing, Airbus uses already is part of this autonomy as a platform that some of the companies I saw in one of the booths, such as Mobileye, could probably talk to you more about. So what does that mean for us and what the new world has to actually contain for us to move towards this direction? This is something that we, as leaders and society members, have to think about on a daily basis. In 2030, if we clicked a time out to about 12 years from now, This is what is believed by many people and industry experts that how this industry is going to transform together. The main important basis is going to be these four things. Is the mobility that you are taking today cost effective? Does it cost less than owning a car? Does it cost less to go from point A to point B? This is a very important metric that government entities, companies, and societal members, individual members like us, are very conscious about. Second thing, comfortness. Are you comfortable going from point A to point B? We choose to use a vehicle today because it is much more comfortable than taking a bus or taking a train or taking a subway. If that comfort is somewhat exchanged with a new technology, then people will adapt to that naturally. Safety and liability, probably the most important thing that I think a lot of other speakers will talk after this is this new mobility transformation safe and sounder than what is currently existence? The chances of us walking out of this door, getting in a vehicle, and getting into a car accident, the room over here currently compose about 500 people. And altogether, like we have 4,000 people registered. That means by end of this year, 3 or 4 of us will be involved in a fatal accident by end of this year, in 2 months. So is the new technology able to revolutionize that safety perspective is something that's going to change what 2030 looks like in terms of mobility. And the last part, which is infra and adaptability. Is the actual charging stations or where the actual electric vehicles could get deployed, the infrastructure itself layer is actually consolidated. When you push a button and an Uber arrives at your doorstep, is it conveniently fast enough that by the time that you go start your engine and get out of the garage door, your Uber would be arrived to your doorstep? By the time you go to the airport and get the airport to go somewhere, is an alternate transportation system that is built by electric train system could get you there faster from end to end point. The infra adaptability is a huge example of what might fail and what might pass in the future. And that's considered mobility as a service. And Uber is in that space that we're connecting every pieces from bikes to trains to airplanes to boats to cars in one platform. And that's what we're looking towards to provide to you by a long shot in our optimistic goal. And the underground layer, AAP, is autonomy as a service. So a lot of these things are currently conducted by manual users, such as you have to have a pilot, you have to have somebody go charge those electric bikes, somebody who's actually conducting the actual trains to move from point A to point B, boat freights moving from Saudi Arabia to Brazil or from Brazil to Japan or China, vehicles moving you from A to B. A lot of these things could be automated if it's actually confined within the route that is already well known. So those are the 2 things that I think we are just ready to get involved in the future of mobility. Mobility as a service that we currently exist, and autonomy as a platform that will fuel these things being able to deploy autonomously by the year 2030. So the world of mobility. The world of mobility to us, like I mentioned, has 3 things that we should really consciously think about. Are we not wasting resource and providing a clean solution for the next generation that our kids are able to live freely just like we had clean air? The last mile issue, are you able to get there quicker than what your traditional method is? Can we reduce waste by using as much shared mobility as possible? And the supporting underground catalyst of having autonomy as a piece. Obviously, the choice is not the government and not the actual companies who's developing this. We follow what the behavior of our users want. So you have a choice. Do you want to make the city in the future look like this, which is organized, green, spacious, clean? Or do you choose to be in the status quo by the year 2030? That's all I have for you today as a last message. Thank you.